April 12th, 2025. Well, it's been quite a week, and it's kind of hard on some of the topics keeping up with events with these videos. Certainly, my last one was almost killed off in part, at least by the time it got going, although there's still some good information at the end of it. But at any rate, well, I think as we see how it played out, I think you can see that I was pretty much right about everything. Um, the Navarro, I think, led Trump astray. I think his own passions plus Navarro's theories kind of were put to the test and found to be a bit of a fiasco. Um, One of the problems with the whole thing was that essentially I make the comment that they basically created a formula which was based on the idea that any trade imbalance had to be due to unfairness, and therefore you had to kind of just accept that that was the way it was. It's sort of like the way how the left looks at any racial disparity is due to it's got to be due to discrimination. If there's a statistical disparity, so if there's a trade imbalance, it's obviously due to the unfairness of the other party, which is a little extreme, I think. Nevertheless, what's come out of this whole thing is that we're left with basically the basic 10% tariff has been left in place on a global basis. Some of the specific tariffs, I guess, were put in place. Otherwise, like Canada and Mexico are probably still there, and but the big ones was with China. And I mentioned before that China was going to be a special case, and it has turned totally into the special case. Um, and so essentially, the Chinese situation is, um, well, as we are right now, I think we have 145% tariff last I call on them, and they have 125% on us. And as I think they made the comment that any further doesn't really make any sense because the basic point is it's effectively a trade embargo. I mean, who's going to pay 125% tariff to buy something from China, right? I mean, it has to be something you really want to have, right? It's not going to be just a pair of clothes or a wrench or something. So the point is that you know that's sort of kind of trade is off the agenda now. And I think from a practical point of view, politically, Trump has pretty much come through it okay. He's lost about 2% of popularity according to the polling I've seen, which is pretty small. He's still doing very good for this length, this point in his administration. I'm certainly a lot better than he did back in 2017 at this point. So in a real sense, I think he's doing okay. Um, so that's kind of that. So so from here on out, I guess we'll have to see how the trade battle with China goes, and kind of go from there. If you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Or you can also follow me on Rumble, which I post there as well. And that's the address is in the description below. They so overall, we want above all else, we want Trump to be successful. A failure here, the Democrats are no alternative; they're a disaster, and he has a few quirky ideas too. But I think we're back to reality now a little bit. I think that the Scott Bassett has kind of come into the more accepted advisor now, and Navarro is kind of a little bit off the beaten path. Of course, it's only a 90-day stand down, so we don't know what happens in 90 days, obviously. And the other aspect is, I know some people were looking forward. I think the president was too, to the idea that this whole thing, as money flowed out of the stock market, that it would go in, that would reduce the interest rates on the bonds and allow us to do something like refinance at a lower interest rate. Well, that didn't happen. In fact, the interest rates on the benchmark 10-year Treasury bond, which is also the was kind of a basis for also a lot of mortgage loans and so forth, is sort of set to that level, has gone up about well, what, about 4 tenths and 4.4 0.4%, I guess, to 4 to 5 tenths of a percent, or something like that, 4.5, something like that. Um, from where it was before this happened. So, and I guess that indicates that we have some bond sellers here. Um, I don't know if they're domestic or foreign. Was it the Chinese or the Europeans or whatever? There's a little bit of that's. I think that's still a little bit in the air as who's doing it, but it definitely has affected the bond rates in a kind of an adverse way, and not the way the administration wanted either. I think that's another aspect which probably led to backing off of this, because this wasn't going the way they wanted at all. And now, on the other hand, we have a lot. We have 70, what, 5 countries now that have come forward and want to negotiate. And of course, you'd want to negotiate, and I think they will. I think that if we approach these negotiations a little bit level head and just try to get the tariffs removed, then I think we can, and any clear obstacles to trade. There was that one example that was thrown out that some country wanted to drop a bowling ball on the roof of the car. If it did it, the car wasn't acceptable, or I don't know who would do that. But if that's the situation, obviously that's not what we want at all. So at any rate, so that gives you an idea that there may be some specific laws and rules that have to be removed, as well as tariff levels. Now, on the other hand, I do get the feeling that Trump would like to keep the 10% tariff on everything, because I think he really wants the money. After all, we might gain something like $300 to $400 billion of revenue that way, and that would help offset some of the tax cuts that have been proposed, such as the no tax on tips, and all that sort of thing, and maybe no tax on Social Security. But at any rate, we'll see if that all happens. I mean, they got to fit all that in there. That they're also battling over the need for some spending cuts, and of course the Doge has identified a lot of things that could be spending cuts. But even though it's been impressive, it still is not at the level of $1 trillion that was discussed. It's really hard to get to that level without cutting into programs that will lead to some other domestic reaction, and so that's part of the problem. But at any rate, I think that I think things that maybe settled down a little bit. The market's still fairly volatile. I mean, look, even the movements today were pretty strong in yesterday, I guess I should say. I'm recording was the end of the week was strongly the positive, but then there's been negative as well. So we don't know what will happen next week. It's just until things settle out a little bit. I think the bond market itself may be a factor in all this. So, anyway, that's kind of the way I see about this economics. This has become the dominant thing for a while, and I mean, I don't know. Of course, you know that he has passed an executive order which will allow us to have showers that have a little bit better water flow, and that's something people want to have. And I think we get away from some of these issues. We have trouble, on the immigration issue. The Supreme Court has ruled that we got to bring that MS-13 guy back from El Salvador to the U.S. Because of that ruling that he was somewhat at risk if he was sent back to El Salvador from some rival gang or something. So we'll see how that. I suppose they will bring him back. That I would think that would be the smart thing to do. You don't want to get the Supreme Court mad. There's some Supreme Court decisions we'd like to have them make in our favor, and this thing is really irrelevant. One gang member, one way or the other, and it looks still like the guy is still deportable. It's just he won't be able to go to El Salvador, so we can maybe find someplace else to send him. Um, yeah. So it's a tricky proposition with all these courts popping off, doing all these decisions, and it's a mess. Like I always said, that the Democrats knew that when they brought all these illegals in the country, we'd play hell ever getting them out again, and that's why they did it. There was a very underhanded move on their part, and it's going to be a bit of a problem for us. And there's a few other things to look at to see how energy prices eventually evolve. I think that a lot of things there was a lot of fear of a recession that came up, and that seemed to have a big impact on energy prices. Whereas the recent inflation indexes have just been reported are not that bad, although the effect of the tariff business hasn't really factored into that to any significant degree yet. So we'll have to wait and see how that happens. There are items that probably will not be available for a while until the thing with China is worked out. And I don't know. That is one of the issues that we have to be careful about because we don't know how China is going to only react to this. One idea is that they will go ahead and make a deal like we want, which I guess is what everybody suspects they'll do. On the other hand, I mean, I don't know exactly what we want. Obviously, don't send the fentanyl and quit stealing intellectual property and quit hacking our computer systems and all that sort of thing, plus the stealing of intellectual property, and I guess remove the tariffs that they have. Again, on a lot of these things, I still have the attitude that um, how much do those tariffs really affect anything in the sense that how much are these countries really going to buy from us even if there was no tariff? I mean, it's like, I guess it'll affect how a few rich people over there, what they might buy, but how much will it really affect, the broad population is probably relatively poor and can't afford these things anyhow. There are issues about agricultural products, of course, and that's an area where they obviously could utilize agricultural products. And since we have these big tariffs on Canada, I still think they might go to Canada to buy lumber now because, we're not taking that off and Canada has lumber available. So, they don't have to make a deal with us on that one. And Canada's probably ticked off enough at this point to make a deal with them. So, I do think the overall tone of this effort was kind of bad, and it apparently has led to somebody selling our bonds, and that's not good. Because remember, we have $36 trillion worth of debt that we need to have financed. And I understand that at the outset of this, about 40% of it was done by foreign countries. So, so there are leverage things there, and so hopefully we get this worked out, get the trade deals worked out, and everything gets on where it's at. Briefly, I'll talk a little bit about the situation in Europe and Ukraine. As I understand it, the Europeans are still trying to take over the whole deal in the Ukraine war and supply Ukraine with the weapons. While the available money that we had appropriate apparently is dwindling, and nobody's really pushed any more through. And if we're trying to cut spending, that's certainly an area where we could cut spending. Uh, the problem is Ukraine I think, has been pampered so much that it's going to be hard to get them to get back to reality, maybe, and it may not, be so well. Anyhow, we'll have to see how that works out. For the moment, though, the word is that I guess so far the attacks on energy systems, those ceasefires have kind of been obeyed once each of them accepted them. Although unfortunately, the Russian time frame and the Ukrainian time frame does not exactly match. I would hope the Russians would agree to abide by the ceasefire at least until the Ukrainians break it, and that will help them out, I think, a lot with dealing with the Trump administration. And it's only a few days, and there's no reason for them to break it first. Let the Ukrainians break it first if they're going to. Frankly, I think that one's sort of to the Russians' advantage, maybe. So, but we'll have to see how the negotiations go overall. We still have the basic impasse I mentioned before, which is the Russians are not so much interested in a ceasefire. They're interested in a real stabilized peace agreement. But it's very unlikely that Ukraine will agree to the terms that they would want at this point because they're pretty onerous from their point of view. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. So anyway, I'll wrap this up for now. And as always, of course, I'll be posting this on the YouTube and Rumble, and the address of my social media accounts are in the description below. I post most frequently on X in between videos. And that will be all for now.